You're not supposed to see this. That's awkward. Hold up. No, no, wrong thing. Oh my god, I'm screwing it all up. No, no. You're not supposed to see any of this. Where's it at? There it is. Turn that off. You can't see that yet. We're not ready. Yeah, it's what we wanted. I did forget to do this too. Whoops. Get rid of the water. Eh. There we go. Damn it. You're looking at the wrong one. There we go. Jesus, that took so long to fix. But hello. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? We are back with some more. Well, we just started actually of Sherlock Holmes versus Cthulhu. So, I don't know how well you can hear me turning pages, right? So, can you hear this? Let me know. Can't really hear it. But anyway, while we wait for everyone to populate here, let me take this sticker off. Okay, you can hear it. Hello, Silent Rain. How you doing? Come on, I'm trying to take the sticker off. So, anyway, The Shape of Ancient Evil. This is on the back of the book. A series of grisly murders rocks London. At each location, only a jumble of bones remains of the deceased, along with a bizarre sphere covered in strange symbols. The son of the latest victim seeks the help of Sherlock Holmes and his former partner, Dr. John Watson. They discover the common thread tying together the murders. Bizarre geometries based on ancient schematics enable otherworldly creatures to enter our dimension, seeking to wreak havoc and destruction. Persons responsible are gaining so much power that even Holmes' greatest enemy fears them, to the point that he seeks an unholy alliance. So, get the book ready? Let's start. All good, Boppy. We just started. We literally just started. So. Yeah, I had to fix that. I had to make sure that I got it right. So, I'm not going to be looking up all the time, and I'll try to reply to chat as much as I can. But I'm going to try to go for, like, this soothest voice, okay? So, hopefully this voice is good enough for y'all. Is the music loud enough? Just let me know if I need to increase the music a little bit. Horse and cart spooked me. Yeah, yeah. Prologue. Amos Baylor. October 1890. Avebury, Wiltshire. The chair was a masterpiece of dimensions. I wanted to wake Christopher, my son, so he could see it. But he was fast asleep in the house. Someday, he would create a Baylor masterpiece of his own. And then, he would stand here instead of me, chant the words, and unleash all that is wondrous and beautiful in the world. But not now. This was my time. One more tweak, and it would be ready. My hands shook from excitement. I rubbed them together, warming them. Then I removed my spectacles, brushing the blood from my forehead, and placed them carefully on the workbench next to the ancient instructions. How would my brethren react when they learned what I'd done? Would they rejoice? Would they worship me? Would the old ones finally return? Would I be the one to open the gate? I snapped my braces once against my work shirt, Dear Amelia had embroidered the yellow leopards at the top of the straps, and it had become tradition to snap them as I finished a particularly important piece of furniture. Perhaps the sting against my chest jarred me into the moment. Poor Amelia was long gone. I died terribly 15 years ago. It was right after I finished the cherry divan from Lord Wiltshire. I not built a divan since. Grasping the corner of the chair, I fitted a bracket to it. The screw turned easily, securing the seat to the front leg. On my braces, the leopards growled, the sound coming from low in their throats. I stroked them. Soon, I thought. Soon all will be revealed. Outside, the wind slammed the barn from all sides. It was a particularly harsh night. The walls quaked. The door clattered against its frame. Rain pounded, and the storm howled. No doubt the leaves would be stripped from the trees by morning. Given the nature of what was to come, it would be a miracle if the trees stood at all. The rafters groaned as if in pain. "The time is now," I said, my voice rising to a scream. "Come! I release you! Come!" Even more than before, the ceiling creaked and the lantern flickered wildly. A wooden beam broke and smashed to the floor, maimed and severed from above. It writhed upon the floor, writhed, and then it shuddered a final time, and died. Hi, Bitler. How you doing? Shards of wood rained down and stabbed me, then bullets of water. One hit the middle of my forehead. I cringed, shook my head, blinked. And then I looked up. The black hole of night yawned over me. Its lips stretched wider and wider. From its maw came the water, a powerful rush streaming through the hole in the ceiling. It ricocheted off the walls and splashed against my face, mixing with my blood and soaking into my shirt. Struck by a powerful gust of wind, I fell against the wall. The chair cluttered to the floor. A spasm of pain tore at my chest. I clutched it, fearing the worst. Not now. Over on the workbench, the oil lamp sputtered and almost went out, then crackled back to life. Abruptly, the hole above me withered. The rain petered to a drip. Quickly, I regained my senses. I dove for the chair, grasped it, and dragged it to a corner of the room. It was such fine ash, the angles carved with perfect precision. There was no other chair like it, not anywhere in the world. Stepping over to the battered table by the door, I snatched up a rag and scooted back to the chair and wiped the water off its limbs. Then I returned to my workbench to consult the diagrams that had passed down countless generations to me. We were the Bellers, the finest woodworkers and craftsmen in all of England. Our pieces had dovetail joints, smooth finishes, and intricate etchings that no other man had ever been able to duplicate. The drawings and symbols were so ancient, they were written on yellowed animal hide and inked in the maroon of old blood. All good, Bitler. Hope you have a good day. Glad you could join us for a few pages, but I hope you have a good day. In the top left corner of the hide was the image of a table adorned with elaborate symbols. 20 years ago, I made that table and gave it to Lord and Lady Ashburton of Avebury. 10 years ago, I made a cedar chest, hinged it just so, and carved the symbols in ordained arrangements on the inner surfaces. I left the chair for last. It was most difficult of the 3 items described on the hide. The symbols were so complex that it had taken me months to create them, often using tools of my own making. Now, I stared at my creation. It was perfect. The etchings rose in bas relief. They curled and whirled. They overlapped. The symbols reached through my eyes into my brain. They tapped into that place where my soul fluttered. I scooped the metal plate from my workbench, then crouched in front of the chair. My fingers caressed the symbols I'd burned into the plate. Heat flowed from the symbols down to my arm and crackled into my brain. I let the warmth rise over and through me, let it crash down like waves. Now was the time. Steadying myself as best as I could, I nailed a plate to the chair, exactly at the midpoint, between the 2 ends of the brace. With shaking hands, I lifted the ancient instructions, uttered the symbols inked at the bottom of the animal hide. I had no idea if my pronunciation was correct, or the letters were alien to me. I just did my best, based on what my father and grandfather had taught me. As I chanted the words, I imagined the faces of my brethren, gazing at me with wonder, mesmerized by my mastery. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and warn y'all, I don't know how to speak this language, so I'm going to try my best, okay? Qualsi pertagen tham daun dagon for thul rahi ro. I intoned. The oil lamp sputtered. Quasi thung, vergagen e kriklikon. The light flashed a bright yellow. I cringed and squeezed my eyes shut, but I continued from memory. Quasi kataro. Sorry. A bright light burned through my right eyelid. Pain exploded in my brain, careened around my skull. My eyes sizzled. Clutching my face, I sank to my knees, suppressing a scream. My right eye felt as if it had boiled over. Liquid oozed down my cheek. I gagged as the bile surged in my throat. The world slipped in and out of existence. Toppling over, I rolled to my side, hands clawing my forehead and cheeks, fingers smeared with the ooze of my eye. My left eye snapped open, and I saw the abomination. Instantly, I knew it would have been better not to have seen it. The entire chair throbbed. The etched symbols beat like 1,000 hearts. Light shattered the back of the room, overwhelming the flickering lamp. Above me, the maw yawned again, stretching greater than before. Lips pulled back into the night. The rain resumed, dripping like saliva. The stars, shining through the downpour, were sharp, sharp teeth, descending, coming closer. And then came the eyes, glowing, red, of such dimensions I cannot describe them. Like the eyes of 1,000,000 insects glued into one, yet unlike the eyes of any creature I had ever seen. Eyes that pulsed in time with the chair, eyes that bore down upon me, and within their depths throbbed the symbols, the horrible symbols I'd carved. Eyes. Infinite. Eyes. Part 1. The Infernal Machine. Chapter 1. Dr. John Watson. October, 1890, London. The night murmured. Leaves tossed themselves through the wet cobblestones of Baker Street. The overhead lamps leaked the yellow that made the raindrops spark like fireflies. It's good to be back with my dear friend Sherlock Holmes, even if I was the only one visiting for the evening, and soon would return to Mary and our newborn son Samuel. I peered pensively from the window, as was my custom. Holmes smoked his pipe and rifled through the newspapers. Despite my mood, I felt at home with the dense smoke, the crackle of the paper, and Holmes' derisive snorts as he scanned the articles. "Well, look at this, Watson," he said. "4 more are dead in the East End, eviscerated. All of them. In each case, the police find the bones heaped into bizarre configurations. The intestines, brains, and limbs are smeared around the scene. According to the reports, the bodies look half-eaten. I'd say there's even more grotesque than Jack the Ripper." He paused. "Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard has no comment about possible suspects." "Yes, I've been following the case." I flipped back on my coattails and settled to the armchair across from Holmes. Though the warmth of the fireplace... Lestrade. Look, am I saying it wrong? Did I say Lestrade? How'd I say it? "Top of the morning, sweet lord. How you doing?" I flipped back my coattails and settled to the armchair across from Holmes. "Oh, you like him? Okay, making sure." I shivered slightly. Holmes pursed his lips, then tapped his pipe twice on the stem and puffed, releasing the smoke in curls. He crossed his legs. He was excited by the mysterious events in the area of London he visited when desperate for opium. I am reading Sherlock Holmes vs. Cthulhu to y'all. This book has been on my shelf for like 3 or 4 years. Actually, longer than that. I think like 7 years. It's been on my shelf for 7 years. I have not touched this book. I've been meaning to read it for a long time. I figured what best time to read it is to read it to y'all. So, we're enjoying ourselves. There's a little cat friend behind me. So, you'll have to excuse my voices. My voices aren't that great, and I'm trying to do a London accent, so any British people, feel free to trash me. Like I said, I'm trying not to interrupt, but your voice is great for this. Thank you, thank you. Going to try to get some work done, but now I'm not clear for the current one they're running. Okay. Well, just relax, Fruit Rat. It'll be all good. So, just listen in and try to do some nice, cozy voices for y'all. Read a nice book. Let's continue. Like I said, I'm going to try to reply to chat as much as I can, but I'm going to be focusing on the reading. Excuse me. I knew his excitement meant he would have no need for the needle and drugs he kept hidden in the mahogany box in his desk. "What do you make of it, then?" he asked. "As a medical doctor, I've seen a lot of corpses, but never anything as grotesque as what was described in the newspapers. The strangest aspect, Holmes, is how they say the bones are heaped. The geometries differ, but the precision is always exacting. And inside each stack of bones is a bizarre... Yes, 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 spherical objects. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Each is about 30 centimeters in diameter and apparently composed of bone, chiseled with arcane symbols that differ from object to object. Each has a hole in the sides of an eye, and if you look through that hole, you can see the opposite side of the sphere. Engraved there is a single symbol that also differs in each case. Most intriguing, wouldn't you say? The press jokes that a killer mathematician is on the loose. In spite of myself, I suppressed a chuckle. I somehow doubt it. Killers tend not to be found among the ranks of the Oxford Club. Indeed they don't. And besides, these symbols aren't mathematical. They're something quite different, Watson. Holmes leaned toward me, and his elbow jostled the small Gothic revival table that stood by his chair. His cup jittered on the saucer. But he seemed not to notice. He was in that state of mind he entered when focused on a problem. To keep my thoughts clear, I had to look away from his gaze. The fact that the corpses appear to be half-eaten leads me to think that perhaps the killer is... I hesitated and glanced at Holmes. What I was about to suggest seemed absurd. I know this sounds odd, but the killer might be a cannibal. I braced myself. But Watson, he would say, if there were cannibals in London, I would have been informed before now. His eyes would light with amusement. Then he would say, think more carefully. You're missing the obvious. Yet Holmes surprised me by taking the notion seriously. This isn't a cannibal, my dear fellow, he said. No, not at all. Consider. There are no tooth marks in the bones. No gnawing, no knife marks, no bullet wounds. Indeed, no bullets ever found at the scenes. And the spherical bones, the weird symbols, Watson. It's all quite perplexing. Do you have any notions about it? The only tangible fact is that all the murders took place in the East End, where crime is rampant. Police found 3 corpses in an alley, next to the building that runs the new tram system. The 4th corpse was inside the building. I admit, Watson, that I'm puzzled. It is a challenge. He peered at me with enough intensity that I began to feel uncomfortable. I see that you've been performing surgery this evening, and it didn't go well. At first, I couldn't reply. It was true. This is why I'd sought Holmes' familiar companionship before heading home to Mary and Samuel. Whatever was on Holmes' mind, be it chemistry or pneumology or crime, I'd hoped it would take my mind off the day's work. Yet I wondered how he knew about the surgery. Since my war service, I only performed surgery during emergencies. Today, I encountered such an emergency, and there'd been no time to get my patient to a hospital. I attempted to save him as best as I could. What makes you say that I performed surgery? I finally asked. The smell of disinfectant you use in your hands after surgery. Feeling slightly ridiculous, I lifted both hands and sniffed. But I smell nothing. That is because you've had it on your hands for an extended time and hence in your nostrils. You can no longer smell you can no longer smell it as I can. Quite true, I thought, but I pressed on. Perhaps I simply washed my hands with disinfectant, I countered. That would have required me to perform surgery, would it? Ah, the fact that you don't deny it speaks volumes. I think you toy with me, Holmes said. Remember, I know your habits. When you arrived 15 minutes ago, Mrs. Hudson took your hat. It was then I deduced that you'd recently removed your surgical mask. A perplexed expression prompted him to explain. When you wear a surgical mask, the ties that hold it to your head tend to match your hair. That is what I saw. That I was forced to surrender. I can see that you're correct, I admitted. There was indeed an operation. Yet, how did you know that it didn't go well? Watson, your patient died on the table. It's actually pretty comforting. It's just a matter of like having to look up and down. Holmes frowned, then rose, turned his back to me, and set his pipe on the mantel. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to speak, but then it all rushed out. I did everything I could to save his life, I said. And yes, I failed. Mr. Travelson's body was too weak to endure the knife. His wife was hysterical afterward. I had to console her. It was all so horrible. She has 4 small children and no means. She'll be destitute, and it's all my fault. Holmes turned. His expression softened. I am sorry, he said. You're a good man, Watson. I usually keep my emotions in check, and rarely do I let death bother me. Mr. Travelston was different, though. I'd been late to my practice that morning, having enjoyed a sumptuous breakfast with Mary and Samuel, while a poor man languished, half dead, hoping for a miracle. But how did you know that he had died? I asked softly. Please accept my apology, dear Watson. I can't help myself when it comes to these matters. I deduce. Logic is all. I nodded, and he continued. Your fingers are smeared with ink, dear fellow. I know you to be a meticulous man. When you write details about a patient's demise and issue a death certificate, you're always very careful. And you wash your hands thoroughly. Rarely have I seen you so smudged in ink. Indeed, I made a mess of it, and neglected to wash my hands at all, I admitted. Then I hurried here to Baker Street. Indeed, and yet, Watson, that's not what really revealed to me that the man had died. The disinfectant, the surgical mask, the ink, they were only minor clues. Again, that gaze. You see, dear fellow, I know you well. You're generally of good cheer and rarely so moody. You only get this way if a patient dies, and you hold yourself responsible. Sorry, I'm adjusting the mic. Can y'all hear me pretty good? Just want to make sure. You're not going to see my model move my mouth too much. So I know that your patient died, he concluded, because I know you. He was right, of course. I stared at the dance of the flames in the fireplace. More than anything, I wanted to forget Mr. Chavelston, his wife, and his 4 young children. A rap sounded on the outer door, the sound of footsteps, and Mrs. Hudson called from the hallway. Mr. Holmes, there's a visitor for you. He says it's urgent. Shall I let him in? Yes, come upstairs, Holmes said. And you will stay, Watson? Of course. I was relieved to have a diversion. Soon Mrs. Hudson trundled into the room. Her face was weary and gray hair straggled from her bun. She'd been the housekeeper at 221B Baker Street for as long as I could remember. She was here when Holmes and I first rented these rooms, years before I met my wife and moved across town. She stepped aside and allowed what looked like a soggy tramp into Holmes' flat. Holmes surveyed the man and sniffed. And what can I do you for, sir? He asked. Will we want the tea, then? Mr. Holmes? Miss Hudson interjected, her nose wrinkled with distaste. He flicked his fingers. Please go, Miss Hudson, he said brusquely. Now. A flush bloomed on her cheeks. Flustered, but accustomed to his behavior, she did as requested. Holmes stared intently at the man, as if deciding his fate, then abruptly gestured to a chair by the fireplace. The fellow smelled as if he hadn't been bathed for months. Hey, Crowgreen. We're just being introduced to a new character. New character just came in to Baker Street. So you made it just in time. We're all good. He wore rags caked in grease and dirt, the cloth stiff. As he fell into the chair and slouched forward, the seat squished and I cringed. Holmes perched on a stool by his chemistry bench, where burbled a red-tinted liquid. Numerous microscopy slides littered the surface of the table, along with rumpled papers, beakers, and glass tubes. He had written many chemistry monographs, most dealing with esoteric subjects understood by few people in the world, and absently I wondered what he was up to this time. The murders, the tramp stuttered. The bones. Instantly, Holmes snapped to attention. His eyes grew keen. Ah, you know something about these bizarre deaths, then, he said. Pray tell us, such that I could solve this tremendous riddle that puzzles Scotland Yard's finest. He remained rigid, awaiting the man's response. What brings you out on a night like this? I asked as kindly as I could. The man cocked his head, and only my experience with the desperately ill kept me from openly displaying shock at his appearance. He was no more than 25 years old, but balding with a scalp splotched brown. Yellow skin sagged on his cheekbones and chin. When he blinked, strings of pus changed shape in his eyes. The knuckle of his right forefinger constantly jabbed at his nostrils. A nervous tic, I presumed, and most distracting. One nostril was much larger than the other, making his nose appear as if a wrench had twisted it so far that the bones had broken. Actually, I'm gonna change this guy's voice. I'll tell you why I'm here, he said, and his voice was broken as well. When he spoke, I could see that he had lost several teeth. Me dad spent his life building a machine. Me mom and sisters died early. The machine does bad things, it does. Interest flared in Holmes' eyes. Ah, yes, the machine, he said encouragingly. I see. Do you understand, Watson? I shook my head, but I hadn't a clue what the man was talking about. Holmes slicked back his hair and his chin tilted slightly upward. Directed at our visitor, his words came clipped and fast. You are Willie Jacobs, the man who runs the experimental train line at the East End, am I right? Why, yes, that is absolutely correct, Mr. Holmes. Your tram runs via a steam-powered engine, as proved by the grease in your clothes and skin. You work long hours and rarely leave the building, where you tend to this machine. This, I know from your complexion, which is sallow from lack of sun. He paused, then continued. You're a bachelor, as no wife would allow her husband to go so long without bathing. Most important, you're the man who discovered one of the corpses in the East End. The police found the other three. Am I right again? Indeed, you are correct on all accounts. Willie Jacobs' eyes widened, and the push strings stretched thin. His right hand dropped from his nostrils to his lap. You're a man of resources, Holmes added, leaning forward. You would have to be in order to engage in such an experimental endeavor, yet you spend none of your wealth on yourself. Now you've come to request my services regarding these violent murders of 4 individuals, all known to you, I presume. Judging from the account, the attacks are swift and no one ever sees the attacker. It's as if people are there one minute, then gutted and murdered the next. The remains are a horrific mess of stacked bones, odd spherical objects, and bloody gore. Willie Jacobs flinched. Astonishment swept across his face, and tears sprang into his eyes. The dead people seem to have nothing in common other than that 3 were found in the alley next to your building, and the other was, my condolences, sir, your father, Mr. Theodore Jacobs. Holmes straightened again. Is this correct, Mr. Jacobs? At this, our visitor slumped forward, head in his hands and shoulders heaving. I began to move toward him, but Holmes shook his head and flicked his fingers at me, so I settled back into my chair. Jacobs drew himself back up and wiped his nose on a dirty sleeve. Mr. Holmes, you are me only hope, he wailed. His whole body quivered and his legs shook uncontrollably. They'll be wanting me for murder. Murdering me and my own dad. But was it me? It's the machine that's the killer. I know it, and the machine knows it too. Why, come now, Mr. Jacobs, you're distraught. That's understandable, but seriously, sir, a machine doesn't know what it's doing, nor can it have malicious intent. Surely there are no witnesses who saw your machine kill anyone. Nobody saw nothing, Jacob spat out. But I know, and I tell you the machine knows. His right hand flew to his nose, the knuckles jabbing wildly at his nostrils. Pull yourself together, sir. I don't know what voice I'm doing for Watson. Honestly, I keep changing Watson's voice. I'll do a deeper voice for Watson, so that way I can remember what it is. Pull yourself together, sir, I said, not knowing quite what to do or say. Please, I added. Holmes waited a moment, then spoke. Tell me, we got the money to buy the fancy whiskey I smell in your breath, he said. It isn't ordinarily swill. Our visitor didn't acknowledge Holmes' question. Me daddy heard about the new electric trams they built up in Blackpool, he said. He searched for days and dug out the drawings gifted from me great-great-great-grandfather, passed down through our family, and they told him how to build a machine. A steam-powered giant. Me and Dad called it the Beast. Your great-great-great-grandfather, Holmes replied. I see. Yet, that would have been a long time ago, Mr. Jacobs. Long indeed before such machines could have been built or even dreamed of. But me ancestors had the drawings, wretched man protested. I swear they did. I've seen them, and you'd be a master of machinery to interpret them. To anyone who's not good with mechanical things, the diagrams would appear as nonsense. He cocked his head and blinked. I didn't have to look to Holmes to guess what he was thinking. For me, it was simple logic. Even if the drawings existed, we had no evidence of it. A moment. Okay, sorry. They couldn't be of the age the man asserted. More disturbing was his claim that the tram machine had killed his father. Such a statement might be designed to hide his own guilt, or it might be the raving of a madman. Either that, or Willie Jacobs had drunk too much of that fancy whiskey Holmes had noticed. Another thought occurred to me. Why was the machine constructed in so poor a section of town? I asked. The newest luxuries typically come to those of greatest wealth first. Finance the construction of the tram system where you live, Mr. Jacobs. Excellent question, Watson! Holmes gestured for our visitor to answer. Abruptly, he turned his back on the man, shut his eyes, and waited for a response. He could be curt and even rude at times, but it was all part of his method, which I knew required the keenest focus. Me dad was me only living relative. Jacobs let loose a sob. I don't know what I'd do without him. I don't know how to work the beast on my own. I moved to squeeze Jacob's shoulder, striving not to wince at the touch. Please, sir, I said gently. You must tell us everything as concisely as you can. Then I crouched beside his chair. I know this is hard, but I promise we will help you. If anyone can help you, it is Mr. Holmes. The pus-filled eyes blinked at me. His knuckles jabbed and jabbed at his nostrils. I pretended not to notice. After he found the diagrams, me dad spent all his waking hours fretting over the beast, Jacob said. We was too poor for him to build it, and he'd get mad and shout and break things. And all of a sudden one day he came to and told me that someone had offered to finance the experiments. He was happy as I'd ever seen him. And who made this offer to your father? Holmes asked. A long pause. Don't know. Of course you know, Holmes barked, and the man flinched. Tell me, sir, or you can leave now. I don't know, Jacobs whined. It might have cut me off for saying. Holmes stared intently at the man. A smile twitched on his lips. And the bones you recently found, the ones reported in today's newspaper. After a moment's hesitation, Willie Jacobs pulled something from his jacket pocket. It was all I could do not to gasp with amazement. In his hand he held a sphere, such as the one described in the newspapers, of bone and covered in chiseled symbols. Over and over, the same pattern repeated. May I have it, sir? Holmes didn't wait for the answer. He grabbed a cloth from his chemistry table and plucked the object from the man's hand. Excuse me. When Jacobs began to protest, Holmes silenced him with a gesture, then gently laid it on the table, lifting his magnifying glass. He peered at the chiseled symbols. Most curious! A bone the size of a man's hand and yet round like a ball. How did you obtain this object? 1 second, folks. Gotta text, waifu what we're doing for dinner. Okay, sorry. The beast killed me dad last night, Jacob said. We sleep in the machine room, me and dad and me. My blankets on the floor. I woke to an awful sound. A keening, a shrieking like I've never heard in the most horrifying nightmares. He shuddered, then continued. But I woke to it, and it was real. My dad was there before me, and he was waving his arms, screaming those awful words again. And what words are those, Mr. Jacobs? The one that screams when you think you don't hear. Words I can't speak in not any language I've ever known. Low, growling noises like rabid dogs make. Wails like creatures die, and shrill sounds higher than any bird. All of it flooding out in me dad's mouth and pouring over me like the sounds, so like you might think at jungle sounds. For a moment he was silent. Your father made all this noise? I asked. He did. The man nodded, and the horror of the memory was plain on his face. And then? I asked. Me dad fell to his knees. I tried to leap from my blankets to try and help him, but I couldn't move. The air was too airy and too hot. It pinned me to the floor. I nearly passed out while I watched, not able to do nothing, as me dad's body bit further and further back from his knees until the poor man broke and buried his face in his hands, weeping. This time, Holmes reached out and placed a hand on Jacob's shoulder. He shot me a glance. I rose, ready to get the brandy. Perhaps, Mr. Jacobs, you need a rest before continuing. With shaking hands, Jacob waves us away. No! If you're here to help me, you must know all. This is what you told me. He looked up, tears and grease streaming down his cheeks. He clasped his hands together, and with his intertwined knuckles, jabbed wildly at his nostrils. Holmes moved to his chemistry bench and rested his elbows on it. His eyes flicked from Jacobs to me and back again. Then let us get on to the end of it, shall we? He said. Pray continue. Jacobs peered at the ceiling. Me dad bent back like I told you, as if something was pushing him. He screamed those accursed words till he choked. He stopped just as his knees broke. He fell back, face twisted in pain. Then his face caved in, just smashed those nothing more than a pancake. Me dad's eyes. Jacobs broke off again and shuddered. Me dad's eyes exploded. Blood everywhere. Skin ripped. Bones where his face used to be. Teeth where his mouth used to be. This poor man, I thought. Whatever Willie Jacobs had seen, it had been awful. And then? I asked. Jacob's face tipped higher toward the ceiling, and his fingers moved rapidly against his enlarged nostril. Holmes caught my eye, and we both shook our heads. The man was clearly out of his mind. He'd seen something in that machine room, and his father had died. Yes, all this rang true. Yet the description of his father's death made little sense, and the man was a complete wreck. And then? I managed to ask again. Jacob snapped his head back and looked at me. His hands dropped from his face. I stared levelly at him, keeping my face straight. I saw what I saw, Jacob said. Me dad's face is no more. Shadows started writhing in the corners of the room, and they met in the middle of the beast. They came out of the beast stronger and darker. They curled and split into bizarre shapes like nothing I'd ever seen. Me dad was dead, his body like a pulpy mess on the floor, a mound of bones and skin and blood. Me head pounded. It hurt from the weight of the air upon me, and from the terrible sights before me. I had to shut me eyes. And when the air finally lifted, I opened them, and all was as I told you. All that was left of me dad was a stack of bones with a sphere in it. Another sphere rolled off the bones. Maybe more. I don't know. And his body just entrails and gore. Jacob's voice trailed off. Did you see anyone? Holmes asked. An intruder? No. Was there any evidence that someone else had been in the building last night? Jacob shook his head again. No. Holmes paused. I kept quiet, knowing not to interrupt his train of thought. And hence, Mr. Jacobs, you deduced that it was the machine that killed your father. Jacobs didn't answer. Has the building experienced any ventilation problems recently? Any change in the airflow? Holmes asked. No. Other than you and your father, has anyone else worked on the machine recently? Never. Only me and me dad. Nobody's allowed in the building but me and me dad. Jacob slumped so far over that I feared he might fall from the chair. Holmes gestured at me, and I ran to pour brandy from the flask we kept on Holmes' desk. As I poured the liquid, I noticed a hypodermic needle in the open drawer. As the tip of the needle glistened a drop, gloom sank over me, as I thought of Holmes and his drugs. But I tried not to think of it, as I held the brandy to our visitor's lips. The man sputtered, then grabbed the cup from me and drowned the contents. He remained silent for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked at my friend. Will you help me, Mr. Holmes? This is a most singular case, Mr. Jacobs. Tell me, is Scotland Yard after you? Jacobs offered his cup, and I poured more brandy, which he drank as quickly as the first round. With all the noise, I know somebody would call the coppers, he said, calmer now. I knew once they saw me dad, I'd be pinned for his murder, so I ran from the building as soon as I could. By the time they could have showed up, I was gone. Holmes nodded. I suggest that you continue to hide from the authorities. Stay elsewhere tonight, but we'll visit you first thing in the morning at the tram building. I won't keep you there long, I promise. I want you to show me where this horrible thing happened to your father. If it helps, I don't believe you killed him, and yes, I do believe you saw something extraordinary. More than that, I cannot yet say. Holmes flagged me to usher our guest out, and I gave Willie Jacobs money for a carriage and handed him an umbrella. When I returned to the sitting room, Holmes was smoking his pipe again, and his eyes were at half-mast. Something most unusual is happening, Watson, he said, without looking up. We leave for the East End tomorrow. First thing, I need your services. You're coming, I presume? Mary won't like me going away for the whole day, I protested. Not when our son is so young. You will do them more good by enduring this threat as soon as possible, he replied. Besides, Mary can manage without you. She's quite capable. I shook my head. I knew Mary wouldn't like the idea of me accompanying Holmes, but a little willpower when it came to resisting Holmes' request for my help. Tell me, I asked, how do you think Theodore Jacobs actually died? He was alive one moment and dead the next. That! The mystery. Indeed it is, Watson. Willie Jacobs makes it sound like as if the killer vanished into thin air. My friend trained his sharp gray eyes upon me. Indeed, but that defies the laws of science, he replied, and his forehead furrowed. It is illogical. And he offered no further comment. Yes, so it is, I said after a few awkward moments. I looked around the room. Be that as it may, I must be off, Holmes. Mary and Samuel await. Lost in thought. He didn't answer. Then, as I reached for the door, he spoke. I'll see you at 8, Watson. Mrs. Hudson will provide breakfast. He flashed a smile at me. and his lips twitched in anticipation. Now go! I have much to think about. I stood for a moment by the door and glanced back to the room I'd occupied for so many years with my old friend. He lit a cigarette and with his back to me, stared into the fire. A mere 6 steps away was his desk with a box in the open drawer. He had used a needle recently. Today. I knew that I would help him in the morning. How I would explain it to Mary was something I did not yet know. So we have time for one more chapter, folks. We'll try to finish this next chapter, and we'll get ready for the next stream. Chapter 2. Leaves clung to the wet seat of the carriage. I brushed them aside and sat beside Holmes. The driver snapped his reins, and the horses trotted off, hooves clattering against the cobblestones. Holmes fidgeted with his walking stick. "We have no time for this," he said. "It'll be a few moments," I said in as pleasant a tone as I could muster. "We'll be on our way before you know it." Having both Holmes and Mary badgering me on the same morning chaffed my nerves. "Do this for me," I continued. "After all, Mary was kind enough to let me accompany you on what could be a very dangerous mission. Her only condition was that she first see you for a short time. She intends to chastise me." "Perhaps she just wants to show off Samuel to an old friend," I suggested. Holmes grumbled something under his breath. The carriage wheels ground to a halt. I gave the driver a coin and asked him to wait. Then Holmes and I climbed a few stairs to the door of the flat I shared with my family. Upstairs, just like Baker Street," he said. "Exactly." I flashed him a smile. On the landing, I knocked once and swung open the door that led to my rooms. Mary was in the rocking chair, Samuel sleeping in her arms. As soon as she saw Holmes, she smiled and stood. Delight flushed over her face. Abruptly, Holmes turned to me. "These could be ritual killings," he said. "The stacks of bones with the spheres and weird symbols, a calling card of sorts for a killer of many victims." My wife gasped. The baby stirred and whimpered. "Really, Mr. Holmes?" she said. Quickly, I tried to remedy the situation. When absorbed by a mystery, Holmes couldn't focus on trivial matters such as greeting my beloved wife and newborn son. It's just the way he was. I was used to it, but it frustrated me nonetheless. "This is Mary," I said. "Or you remember her, I'm sure." Holmes inclined his head. He lifted his top hat and replaced it. "Of course," he responded. I poked at the blanket so Holmes could see Samuel's face. He'd been born prematurely, and he was so tiny that sometimes it scared me. "And my son," I said. Holmes impatiently tapped his walking stick against the plush sofa. His eyes swept the room, drinking in everything for future reference. The blue chairs, the thick rug that we procured shortly after our wedding, and the vases at the side tables. He remembered the painting of Mary's father that graced the wall by the kitchen. Nothing would escape him. "The bones as calling cards would make some sense, except for the singular nature of the arcane spheres," he said. "What killer would take the time to create elaborately carved round the bones, each with different symbol sets all over them, each with a different internal symbol? None of the symbols represent any equations currently known to even our foremost mathematicians and scientists." "Holmes," I interjected, "surely you could say hello to Mary and look at my son?" He grimaced. His lids dropped over his eyes and fluttered up again. He gave Mary a brief and very tight smile, then glanced at the baby. Mary held Samuel in her left arm and extended her right hand. She smiled warmly. "It's indeed a pleasure to see you again," she said to Holmes. "I know you're preoccupied with the case." He nodded, briefly held her hand and released it. "I'm so glad you're taking good care of Watson," he said. "And now we must be off. Watson, come." Holmes' crisp voice awakened Samuel, who squirmed in his swaddling cloth. His face went red, and I knew that at any moment he would start screaming. Now would be a good time to leave. Mary was already upset that I had insisted on going off with Holmes to hunt a killer. Now Holmes had been rude to her. Hoping to mollify my wife, I hugged her and promised that I'd return quickly. "Yes," she said. "Do so, John." Abruptly, she grabbed Holmes' arm. He looked startled, but remained in her grasp as she issued her orders. "You will return my husband in one piece, Mr. Holmes," she said firmly. "You will make sure he is safe. He knows I don't approve of him taking up with you again. It's too dangerous for a married man." She turned to me. "If not for my sake, then be careful for your son's sake." Holmes' eyes shrunk to slits. I was anxious to be on my way before I had to referee an argument between the two of them. So I steered Holmes to the door and suggested that he wait outside in the carriage. He needed no encouragement. Then I gave my poor wife a proper goodbye. She kissed my cheek. Her eyes were teary. That's when Samuel started screaming. Mary cooed and cooed, but our son would have none of it, and kicked her in the ribs. I backed away from them toward the door, and at the last second turned and walked back. Mary clenched my left arm and pulled me close. Samuel's tears splashed hot across my skin. My throat tightened. Even Samuel's tears felt tiny. The baby was everything to me. He and his mother. Hush, Samuel, I whispered. Daddy won't let anything happen to you. I rested a finger on his cheek, coarse skin on angel silk, such tiny gray eyes, along with fat cheeks and a mop of black hair. Mary stroked my head, and I would never forget that touch. It was soft, like the flutter of a butterfly's wings. Be careful, John, she said. She was beautiful, my Mary. Sandy blonde hair and blue eyes, a gentle face. Her heart was beautiful, too. And yet, there had always been something about Holmes that I couldn't resist. If not for him, my life would have been nothing but consultations, shepherd's pies, and long walks in the evenings. I found him fascinating and brilliant, felt energized when I was with him. I felt alive. I worried about Holmes' addiction to drugs, yet it was partly for selfish reasons. For what would I do without him in my life? Perhaps my addiction to Holmes was as dangerous as his addiction to cocaine and morphine. I broke free from Mary, forgetting to tell her that I loved her. I raced from the flat, and then leaped to the carriage where Holmes waited. The tram lines buzzed, powered by the overhead cables of Willie Jacobs' machine. Holmes stared at the pole set alongside the street, and tapped his walking stick against one of them. Then he pointed his stick toward Osborne Street. Come, Watson! I hurried past Randolph's cigars and fine liquors, then past Seaway's fresh fish, all the while holding my breath. From the odor I would lay bets the fish was anything but fresh. The children seemed to pop from nowhere and cluster around me, beggars all of them. Please, mister, give a coin, just one coin. I never gotten used to the orphans that Holmes and I employed from time to time on Baker Street. We thought of them as the Baker Street irregulars, but such irregulars lived on the streets of every city and every country. Digging some spare change from my pocket, I gave it to the children, who ran off and left us in peace. Holmes was already ahead of me, cutting a sharp and fine figure amidst the crowds of ragged men and women, hawking everything from newspapers. Fourth man murdered. Scotland Yard, no clue. Two brightly colored flowers and fruits. In front of every third or fourth building, women stood holding their children, with signs reading, Hungry, and Please Feed. A baby carriage careened past, pushed by a woman in a broadcloth dress. She was hatless and without gloves. Someone poked my shoulder, and I jumped. I twisted and brought back my arm to unleash a punch, but it was Holmes. He returned for me, and his face was anxious and pinched. Come, Watson, we must make haste, he insisted. Let us find Willie Jacobs and his tram machine. Come, come. I nodded and trotted after him. His long legs and lean body, not to mention his quick pace, were a tough match for my own short and somewhat overfed form. The perks of having a wife included eating and sleeping more than I used to when rooming at 221B Baker Street. Despite Mary's pampering, though, I remained in excellent shape, due in part to my years of military service. I felt up to the task and excited to be with Holmes again. Suddenly he whirled. Notice the tracks in the street, Watson, he said, and he pointed. Set within the cobblestones along the right side of the street were two evenly placed tracks, each wide enough to accommodate cab wheels. These are for the trams, I said. Indeed, his gaze shifted. Steel tram wheels move along these tracks, which contain grounding wires. Electricity powers the trams from overhead. It shoots through those steel cables that hang along the street from pole to pole. Look at the poles, Watson. He gestured with a stick. Next to the two tracks, evenly placed poles were set along the right side of the street. On top of each pole hung an awning consisting of a wooden cantilever secured by bolts and braced by wooden slabs. A curved overhang protected anything beneath the awning of the London rain. I peered at the intricacies of the bizarre scientific equipment. I'd never seen an electric tram system before. A horse trotted past, pulling a buggy. That is my preferred method of transportation, I thought, and much safer. Give me a second. Sorry, I got stuff stuck in my hand. Holmes pointed to a stick and mechanical parts hanging over the awning. You see that small wooden bar? Watson, bolted to the cantilever and hanging perpendicular to the tracks. And do you see that ceramic bar bolted to the wooden one? Yes, I said slowly. Do you know why there's a ceramic bar there? It has to do with conducting the electricity that powers the trams, I said, stating the obvious. Holmes was deep in thought, however, and didn't acknowledge my comment. His explanation was as much for himself as for me. The ceramic bar insulates the electricity, protecting the wooden structure. Without insulation, the wooden bar, and indeed the entire pole with its cantilever and braces, would go up in flames. Now, pointed again, do you see the metal bar attached to the other side of the ceramic one? Use the thin copper tube holding the cable wires. Yes, Holmes, I see everything, though I admit that I don't understand how it all works. For a moment, we both stared at the mechanisms. Strangers passed us, shifting like shadows against the brown buildings. Insects buzzed in the dry straw that straggled over the dirty windows. Low over the city, dark clouds hung like clumps of mud. Then from afar, a machine clattered, steel upon steel. Holmes and I turned from the poles and the cable wires, and we stood, transfixed, as a small red and white tram rumbled around the corner. From two open windows, children waved and laughed, their mothers laughing with them. Their fathers glowed with pride that they were among the first to afford such a fancy ride for their families. A conductor up front waved. The tram rumbled up the tracks toward us. Horses reared and backed away, their drivers scowling at the new-fangled transportation system. A long copper tube slanted upward from the top of the tram to a small copper U-shape that stood along the overhead electric cables. A steel spring bobbed in an angle between the copper tube and an upright bar on the tram's roof. Holmes beamed at me. "Why, look at that!" he cried. "It's marvelous! See the spring, Watson? It provides pressure so the copper U always rubs against the bottom of the electric cables. The electricity moves along the cables and through the copper tube down to a motor inside the tram car. It's wondrous!" The little machine somewhere rumbled past us, and then around a corner onto another street. "Absolute genius," Holmes muttered. "Now come, Watson, not a moment to waste. We must meet up with Willie Jacobs and then let him return to hiding." I hurried after Holmes deeper into the residential section of town, where sludge burbled from the sewage grates. We were in Ripper territory, and my heart picked up pace. The Ripper had never been apprehended. No one knew if or when he might start killing again. I found myself peering into the shadows between the slum houses and heaps of garbage, certain to see the glow of a knife and an evil grin. Holmes seemed so unaware that we were in the part of town known for death. He strode ahead of me and turned onto Osborne Street. Nerves tingling, I followed. A boy with a dirty face peered from the window of a tiny, blood-stained window. A sign tacked to the roof read, "Meat." Poor fellow. Wanted to stop, if only to offer a smile to the boy. But Holmes hooked a left into Thrall Street, and fearing I would lose him, I hurried on. Finally, he stopped by a square building with a large door that reminded me of a portcullis made of solid metal. "Here we are," he said. "Willie Jacobs' abode, where he keeps the amazing tram machine." Holmes rapped on the metal door while I mopped my forehead. He didn't seem at all tired from our trek through the East End. The metal door creaked open, and Holmes ducked beneath it into darkness. Heart racing, I followed. "Welcome to the dwelling, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson." Willie Jacobs. His face illuminated by the glow of candles set into the walls. He wore the same filthy rags as last night, and he smelled just as bad. The poor fellow had been hiding all night, per Holmes' instructions. Using a pulley, he lowered the door. Have you eaten?" I asked. "Hope you found a suitable place to sleep, yes?" Jacobs frowned. He started jabbing his nostrils again, and I shuddered. "I slept with the rats," he said. "In the alley, I ate some trash." "But you have money from the man who financed your father!" I exclaimed. "Why didn't you eat a decent meal?" It was Holmes who answered. "Because he was in hiding," he said brusquely. "Watson, we have little time. Inspector Lestrade or some other fellow from Scotland Yard might show up at any moment." Jacob shuffled his feet. His fingers jabbed more rapidly at his nose. Something cracked overhead. Startled, I peered at the high black ceiling, where sparks shot from the cable strung across the top of the machine. The ceiling had an odd geometry, sloping to the left and bulging to the right. I shook off a frisson of fear and let my gaze fall. The machine was immense. It filled the cavernous room from one side to the other. It stretched to the ceiling, pile upon pile of limbs made from pipes and oddly shaped steel draped in cables. The whole mess thrummed, and as Holmes and I followed Jacobs toward the machine, it seemed to purr. I could understand why Jacobs thought of the machine as a living beast. Even I, the doctor of science and medicine, grew cold in the presence of it. There was an eeriness to it, and against all logic, fear gripped my heart. Jacobs and I stopped several yards from the beast away from the beast. As for Holmes, he took a few more steps toward it, staring intently at it while avoiding the metal pipes rattling on the floor. I realized that the floor was shaking from the thrumming, or breathing, of the machine. "Come," Holmes said, waving at us to follow him. I nodded and carefully stepped over the snarls of wine. Grease clung to the air and caked my nostrils. Curiously, the machine reeked of garlic. "Settle down," Jacob told it firmly. The beast quivered, pipes rattled, fire sparked. The construction belched steam. "Settle down," Jacob said again, his voice softer. The beast hummed and seemed to become more tranquil. We approached a straw mat with blankets on it. An oil lamp flickered and smeared yellow stains across the floor. "Tell me about your machine, Mr. Jacobs," Holmes insisted, "and don't omit anything, no matter how trivial you think it is." Jacobs twitched, his legs shook, and he sank back against my friend, who staggered and gently dislodged him, shifting Jacobs over to me. I recoiled at the smell and the dirt, but managed to hold on to the poor fellow. "The beast," he stammered, "is near acted like this before. Me dad and me, we had bolts popping and pipes cracking over the years, but that was normal mechanical failure. Then we was well equipped to deal with them problems. What's going on now? Well, I have no clue." "What do you mean? Are you saying that the machine has been malfunctioning?" Holmes said. "Yes." "Why did you tell me this last night?" "You didn't ask." Holmes remained silent for a few seconds, then instructed the man to explain whatever he could about the working of the machine. These surroundings clearly upset you, Holmes said. Tell us what's been happening, and then we will get you out of here as quickly as possible. I steadied Jacob's shoulders, helping him to stand on his own. We'll get you food, a promise, and a bath. Whatever you need, you've been through an ordeal, but please first do as I say. Still shaking from his memories and his fears of police at Scotland Yard, Jacobs did as I instructed. You could see that these front joints are sealed and nothing's leaking. Jacobs pointed to steel chains and cables dangling from both sides of the machines. Valves whisked open, then eased shut. The hydraulic pump, you see. It slides up and down on gum sandurac and fat. We feed phosphorus to the beast, he said, and then added, as food. You smell something like garlic? That's the phosphorus. I nodded, although I didn't understand the mechanics. My specialty was human biology and the treatment of disease. I glanced at Holmes, whose face conveyed nothing more than fascination. He was shrieking it all in, all of it, and later would remember every detail, every joint, every nail, screw, and bolt. Over here, Jacob said, by the pit. He drew himself up, stepped away from me, and tottered closer to the clanging machine. 3 of us ducked under dangling cables around the right side to find a large hole in the midst of the tangled metal. Near the hole, steam hissed through pipes and liquid metal flickered. 28 rods connected the pistons to the crankshafts, Jacob said, as if this would make any sense to us. Metal wheels turned, gears meshed, belts vibrated, and my cylinders sweated. My mind flipped back to the meat building, where the boy had peered at me from the window. If Jacob's father had been the butcher in this section of town, the 2 of them would have lived there instead of in this building with a strange machine. You have to count your blessings in this life, I mused. Never forget that things could be worse. God help me if I'd ever been raised like Jacob's. Probably wouldn't have lived to be 25. My childhood friend Albert woke one day to find he was a fool, Jacob said, as if it made sense. Babbling like an idiot Albert was before that day, he'd been as smart as me. Maybe smarter. Hey, Steve Shadow. How are you doing today? Hope you're having a good day. I wondered at this sudden turn in the discussion. Apparently Holmes was as puzzled as I was. You think these mental changes have something to do with your machine? He asked Jacobs. The beast, it knows what it does. And it... Before he could finish his sentence, Jacob screamed and his hand flew to his mouth. Something smashed against the ceiling. I jumped as metal shards rained to the floor, barely missing us. And then, the building lurched. And that, where we are going to end today's reading stream, folks. We're on now chapter 3. Just in time, because we are going to now start up Yakuza 0. Thank you so much for tuning in for this little side project. I wanted to try it out, see if you guys enjoyed it, and it seems like y'all really like me reading to y'all. So I'll keep on doing it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to stop the stream for like a half second. I'm going to edit the details, and I'm going to stop the stream, and we'll come back. And we're going to play some Yakuza. So don't leave. We're going to start at Yakuza. And then Yakuza 0, search, click. Alright. So I'm going to end the stream for a half second, and then we're going to turn it back on, okay? So 3, 2, 1.